Hi everyone, my name is Abhishek Joshi. I go by AJ. I'm very excited to present this topic to you today and represent Visa and share some of the thought leadership that we are building in the space of data innovation. I know the structure is a little bit different than what we are probably used to, but I'm super impressed by the organizers in terms of how they have structured this. So I'm very much looking forward to connecting with all of you online when the actual event happens virtually. A quick disclaimer before we get started. So, all the case studies, statistics, research, and recommendations are provided as is and intended for informational purposes only. Although the thought leadership that I'll be sharing today is based on our global experience and expertise in data innovation and payments, this should not be relied upon for making any business decisions. So, a little bit about myself. I like to consider myself an apprentice of all things data analytics, digital, and IoT. To be quite honest, the more I learn about these topics, the more I realize how little I know. And therefore, apprentice is probably the best word that describes me. I've been very fortunate to have worked and been associated with some of these top companies and financial institutions with some of the best practitioners of analytics in the world. And I feel very lucky that, I've been able to learn from them. Currently, I'm at Visa in the consulting and analytics organization, and I'm responsible for providing strategy consulting services to some of the top financial institutions in the US. And to be quite honest, it's a very, very interesting job. I get to wake up every day and try and solve some of the strategic problems that these institutions are facing with data and analytics. You can reach me on LinkedIn, but probably the best way to connect with me is on Twitter. So before we dive into the content, I just wanted to provide a little bit more context on why customer experience and why is it taking a center stage now. So as you know, businesses have traditionally competed on trust and value proposition, be it a product focused company or a services focused company. Value proposition is extremely critical. But over the last decade, customer experience has been gaining ground quite rapidly. And this is really thanks to rapid digitalization and mobilization, right? Which has actually given you an opportunity to create multiple touch points with these customers. But when you think about customer experience, you can no longer think about competing with players only within your industry because most of the expectations are being reset by likely by companies who are outside of your industry pool. So that's one thing that to consider about, like when you think about customer experience, yes, it is a key differentiator, but you also have to think about who within that space has been resetting customer expectations. So our topic for today, powering digital customer experiences with payments data. So the way I would like to structure this is actually around three key pillars, right? Like the first thing that we'll talk about is talking a little bit about like what are these digital experiences and how can you actually think about it in a much more structured manner. Then we'll dive a little bit into why payments data and what is the inherent advantage of using payments data in powering some of these digital customer experiences. And the third piece I would like to talk about is how do you really bridge the gap between data and the customer experience with insights. So when it comes to digital experiences, of course, customer expectations are being reset rapidly, right? And these could be your social media companies, these could be your search companies, it could be other big tech players, or it could be your financial institutions. But we see four key themes emerging in the market quite rapidly. Again, this is through all walks of life or different types of industries, right? So the first one is contextual messaging. As you can imagine, like as you're carrying your phone everywhere, I mean, there is tremendous amount of location data that is available, but then also there is huge data mining potential from emails, like how you engage with apps and things like that. So we do have a lot of information that can create this contextual view of you as a customer, and how do we deliver experiences at the right place and the right time depending on that, right? So a very good example of that could be like you are at an airport and you're actually constantly getting notifications about flight delays, or perhaps your boarding pass is immediately available you on your phone, right? Similarly, proactive engagement is another key theme. Basically, how do we anticipate some of these customer needs, and then how do we push some of these relevant experiences to them? Personalized recommendation is absolutely a critical one. I think this is where customer expectations are probably a lot more severe. Is that, don't talk to me as a general customer segment, like talk to me as a segment of one, and like how do we actually drive some of these experiences, at the personal level. And then the last one I think that is very critical is what we call guardianship, and omnipresent guardianship. Basically, customers are trusting you with their data, right? And it's your job to actually protect it, and be the guardian in terms of if you see any misuse of that data or access or privacy, right? And that's becoming customer expectation very rapidly. So overall, like that's how we think about like digital experience. Now, similarly, like if you want to think about these delightful customer experiences, I mean, again, all of them are pretty much powered by a very foundational layer of data and analytics. So a very simple way of looking at the customer experience stack, I mean, you have the customer applications on the top, but then they are powered by these insights that are built on a powerful layer of customer data. And obviously, there are multiple technologies and multiple data sources that you can use for it. But from the customer's perspective, they are really interacting with that customer application layer. So it could be a mobile experience, it could be a conversational AI experience, or it could simply be your interaction with your streaming service. All that can be really built on a very solid layer of data and analytics that can drive that contextual, personalized, and relevant experiences for your customer. At the same time, drive a lot of guardianship around data misuse or privacy protection. So let me talk a little bit about the payments data advantage, and why do we think payments is actually a very powerful source of information that can be used to build these digital customer experiences, right? So payments are actually very closely tied to customer lives and allow us to learn about their lifestyle preferences, needs, and even affluence really very well. So if you think about here in the US, right, and if you think about the percentage of ownership of financial products by age group, payment adoption such as debit and credit cards actually starts very early on and actually stays consistent throughout the customer's life cycle, which means it is that medium is present like throughout a customer's life journey. Now, at the same time, it actually also creates tremendous amount of insights, because the number of transactions that you see coming from credit card transactions, for example, are very high, disproportionately higher compared to some of the other channels such as call centers, ATMs, bank branch, or even mobile banking and internet banking. And this is more as an example coming from financial services, but there is tremendous amount of actually data that can be captured from payment transactions. And just to give you an example, and using Visa network, right? Again, we are one of the largest payments network on the globe. Every single transaction that we capture comes with extremely rich amount of metadata that can be mined to develop deep insights about the customer, right? So every single transaction, we know whether or not it's a face-to-face environment, whether it's an online like e-commerce, m-commerce, whether or not it is being used for utilities or more of a bill pay kind of a payment. But most importantly, we also capture this data, and we know where these customers are spending, and we can actually track almost more than 650 different merchant categories. So collectively, as you can imagine, this is like very powerful metadata that can give you a picture of where, when, how, who, what about a customer. Just an example of our payments network, we have about 3.4 billion payment cards globally, about 61 million merchant locations, so like very solid coverage. But on an annual basis, we almost see 180 billion payment transaction, and every single one of those transactions comes with this rich metadata. So again, very, very powerful source of information for us. And so when you think about how could we actually use some of this data, that's when we actually think about like customer insights, right? So how can I use this data to build deep understanding of customer lifestyle preferences, right? And which can allow me to build experiences that are more relevant and contextual for the customer based on their lifestyle, based on their location. How can I get an early indication of the customer disengagement? And that can actually inform how do I want to drive more relevant value proposition to be proactively engaging them. How do I proactively upgrade customers to get more out of the relationship? Because all these customers are extremely dynamic in nature. They're going through multiple life events. They're changing in affluence. And at the same time, you as a product company or you as a financial institution have to constantly adapt to that. So how do you drive more personalized product upgrades or cross sell using that data? And then finally, like another huge use case is understanding the financial well-being of the customer, and that directly ties to like how much advisory support you could actually provide to them. And this is probably more relevant for financial institutions, but I mean it can truly help you design experiences which are centered around guardianship. So we talked about how do we define digital experience, and then we talked about what is the inherent advantage of using payments data. So let's talk a little bit about like how would you accelerate execution of building some of these experiences using the payments data. So basically the gap that we need to bridge is how do you take the data and extract the insights from it so that it powers the digital experiences that we have. So, so payments are actually very well integrated into multiple business models. So if you think about payments in terms of financial services, so payments definitely have an overlap with, let's say, checking or your direct deposit account, because debit, which is a feature of checking, I mean, it's a pure payments product. And plus you can use your checking as a payments mechanism as well. Credit card is another form of lending as well. So there is clear overlap with lending, with payments. But then payments is also a critical part of functioning of other financial services products such as investments and insurance. But not only that, payments also overlaps with merchants and services because that's essentially how they're making money or getting paid. So overall, payment itself is well integrated and actually can generate a ton of data that can be mined. But then the question to ask is like, how do I actually get that data? Of course, you can look at your own data or you know, as a business, you have access to your own data, hopefully. But then it's also very critical to look at market information as well, because you constantly want to benchmark yourself against the market. And that's where it becomes very important to actually understand the payments data value chain. So within payments, as you know, there are multiple verticals as well. So there is consumer to business payments, which you and I do almost on a daily basis. There are P2P payments, which we do quite often as well. But then there are other forms of payments such as B2C, which is essentially your insurance disbursements and things like that. Or it could be purely business payments, which are B2B payments. Now, depending on that, there are various technologies that actually enable that. So we call them like point of sale technologies. And there are multiple players within that. There is the payment processor. And then at the end, there is also the payment network. So this is more of a simplified view of a payments value chain. But the key thing to note here is that as you go down on this stack, in fact, you start getting more and more data. So when you think about partnering with an organization or thinking about like how do you source this information, that's what you have to keep in mind. And that's where like somebody like us become could become a very strong partner for you, because we essentially have access to all the data that flows over our network, right? And then we actually have the ability to split it across these different payments verticals that we talked about. And interestingly, so you have the data. Now, we talked earlier about how do I bridge the gap between data and digital experience through the insights. And that's where we believe machine learning and AI actually are wonderful solutions for us to kind of mine this payments data. So the way we actually like to structure this is firstly think about it from the perspective of, here is the customer experience themes that we talked about, and that's what we need to drive at the customer level. And then how do we think about driving that at various stages of the customer life cycle? And now based on that stage, such as let's say take a credit card for instance, you have clearly have the acquisition stage, onboarding, establish usage, and attrition. And how can you use the payments data to be able to drive better experiences at each one of these stages? So from acquisition perspective, like how do I actually identify best markets and best customer segments? Because from the experience perspective, you're actually driving relevancy as you're targeting some of these customers. Like how do we think about timely cross-sell or upgrades for your current customers when it comes to new products? Similarly with onboarding, like how do you improve effectiveness of early months moments on book for some of these customers? And then how do you actually also differentiate customers who are truly engaged with your product or somebody who might be a gamer? And this is very valid in financial services space, especially given the high introductory offers, at least here in the US. And then we think about established usage around how do I drive more loyalty and engagement through better rewards and deals offers, but then also think more in terms of what we call like top of wallet customers or truly engaged customers. So these are your best customers, very high value customers. And then from the attrition perspective, you can think fraud and authorization, and you can think about re-engagement of customers and the risk of attrition. So I would just like to close with saying that yes, analytics technology is progressing quite rapidly. But then if you marry that with the inherent advantage that you get with payments data, you can further accelerate that movement, especially in terms of creating that customer experience, personalized customer experience. So that's why like when payments data, which is highly structured, it can actually analyze trends at the macro level, but really it can get deep at the customer level at the same time to drive some of these digital customer insights. Now, if you marry that with how rapidly processing the data processing is progressing, how things like natural language processing or self-learning algorithms are moving, I think the future is extremely bright, and I'm really excited to see like how payments data can power more and more of these digital experiences in the future. Was a very brief overview of like how do we think about payments and how it can actually drive some of these digital customer experiences. This is just start of the conversation, so feel free to reach out to me online. Obviously, I'm available on Twitter as well if you want to have more of a one-on-one conversation. But really enjoyed talking to everyone and looking forward to connecting with you through this conversation.